Welcome to the second module. We've completed module 1 and now we're moving on to some of the more foundational concepts in doing educational research. As part of the second module, you'll be doing several readings, 2 chapters from Creswell. They're very detailed chapters, but very helpful. McGolden, Weems, and Hostetler as well, looking at some key concepts in doing educational research. And you'll also be completing some assignments during the second module. You'll be doing your first forum group, and you'll also be doing your the part B of your observation assignment. Now, for any of these assignments, you'll notice in, I think pretty well each of the modules, there's kind of like a little, it almost looks like a little black button. And when you press that, and you'll be probably familiar with this, but just to be so that I'm sure that you know, you can go to that tab and it will pop up several tabs, and one of them will be the readings. So you'll be able to get the links to the readings and access them very easily if all goes well. And you'll also have I believe it's the third tab. You'll be able to go to that, and that has much more extensive instructions about the forum. So you'll be able to have a look at that. And I'll be posting the part B of the observation assignment. So it's going to be a busy module, but I think a very important one and helpful to you in doing your research. Articles, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on Creswell because both of the chapters are pretty self-evident. They go into sometimes excruciating detail, but they are really, really helpful. And these will be chapters that you'll go back to when you're doing your research at the completion of your program, because they really do provide the kind of nitty-gritty, the things you need to do and the things you need to be thinking about when you're actually doing your research. So in chapter 3, that is, he talks about purpose statements, research questions, hypotheses, and so on as they relate to both quantitative and qualitative research. And he says that these are important because they provide study signposts, and those signposts are important to think about and state clearly. One of the dangers of doing research is research creep. You start off with a question, and then as you're doing your literature review and so on, you come across something, you think, oh, that'd be important and that might be interesting to include, etc., etc. And soon your question becomes so broad and so general that it's really, really hard to provide anything that's that's actually very meaningful. So this broad focus isn't always a researcher's friend. So what the purpose of actually developing these statements can be is in providing a focus for you as the researcher. And that focus will be what stays with you, remains with you, is written on your mirror so that you see it first thing in the morning. It's a sign on your desk and so on, so that everything that you do is related to that particular focus. It's also a track for the reader. So as you're writing up your research, in stating your purpose statements, in stating your research questions, your hypotheses, and so on, the reader is very clear about what it is that you are doing in your research. In that way, they won't be expecting that you'll be doing something else that may be of interest to them as well around that particular question. They'll know that this is what you're providing in terms of a body of knowledge related to a question they may be interested in. So as Creswell argues, both of these are important aspects of being very clear in developing your purpose statements and so on. He also makes a point, and a very explicit point, around the differences between how this works out for quantitative and for qualitative research, and how this may require different approaches to writing up your purpose statements and so on. So I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to go into that in any detail, except to suggest that you read through that carefully and make notes to yourself so that when you get to the point of actually doing that for yourself, you're going to be able to do that with real clarity. And of course, as you get into your article critique assignment as well, where you identify 15 articles and write up a certain number of them and so on. It will be important at this point probably for you to start thinking about what that question might be, what that area of inquiry might be, so that as you're doing that assignment, you can actually bring that body of knowledge to the work that you eventually do when you do your final research. So this is a good time to be reading Creswell, thinking and analyzing what it is that you might be thinking about doing in the future. The literature review, of course, is a very important step, and we talked about that actually in Module 1, a very important step in thinking about what does the literature actually tell us already about the phenomenon or about the particular question or hypothesis that you're going to be pursuing. He offers some practical tips around identifying key terms, and you do that in developing your question, even in developing a preliminary title or a preliminary research question that's going to help you identify what those key terms are. And then you can locate in the literature the various things that are available. Now, I would draw to your attention, see if I can do this now, to your attention on the eClass site to the right-hand side, at least that's where it is on my computer, there's some links for the library, and one of them is videos that are available to you. I would suggest that you really take advantage of the work that the library has done in providing this kind of information. If you're close to Edmonton and you can get into the library, set up an appointment with one of the librarians. They're absolutely incredibly fantastic in helping you find the kind of literature that will be very helpful. But if you're a distance from the library, that might not be possible. And this is certainly a wonderful resource. So you can go through and you can find out how you actually search some of the databases that are available, including ERIC, which is one of the ones that, and this referenced here as well, that Creswell talks about. There's also some information here about setting up RefWorks, which is a way to keep an ongoing database for the various readings that you're accessing, and you can keep your references there, and when you're building your references list at the end of a paper, for example, if you've cited any of those, it will, I'm not quite sure how this works, it's a bit of magic that I haven't explored to any great extent, but I know people who have, and it will build your references list for you. So depending on the kind of citation method that you're using. So it's a really handy dandy kind of knowledge to build, if that is the kind of thing that is of interest to you. So what I'm saying is this is important information, and it would be really helpful to you to actually access that and to learn more about it. Okay, let's get back to our slides here. So once you've located the literature, and the library has, we are very lucky at the University of Alberta to have the kinds of resources that we have, particularly the electronic resources. So, you know, in taking advantage of that, building various kinds of resources that might be available to you, then you have to look at them and say, okay, is this something that's really going to be helpful to me? You evaluate the merit of them based on quality. For example, are they refereed? Have they been refereed in journals that are legitimate journals? And you can find that out actually on the citation page, or when you're looking up articles. One of the criteria is refereed journals, and when you click that, that's all that will come up, and that way you can kind of be assured that the quality is there. You can look up the journal and find out whether that journal actually uses qualified referees and so on. And then, of course, the other part of it is, in addition to the quality of the actual article itself, is this about value to your study? This might be a wonderful, interesting, fabulous article, but does it really have value to the study that you're doing? So you have to make those kinds of judgments, and then you can build the literature that is going to set you up for a really excellent study. Then you have to organize it, and Creswell has some ideas for that, and there are others as well. And then you can then you write up your literature review in various ways. For example, for your assignment for this course, that is one way of kind of developing a body of literature, but it won't help in comparing and contrasting and so on. So that is something that we'll be talking about a little bit later in the course, but that's something that you'll be able to, you'll need to do in your research when you're building your literature review. Okay, there we are. All right, so the McGoldin and Lewis article is an interesting one, and it's a very accessible article. I found it interesting to read. And if you've done any kind of research, you know the kinds of things that they're talking about. And if you haven't, this is a really excellent article to read ahead of time so that you can be attuned to the kind of ethical dilemmas and the ethical questions that are raised, particularly in qualitative research. It's not that they don't emerge in quantitative research, and Hostetler actually gives some examples of what that might look like. But in McGoldin and Lewis, they're talking specifically about qualitative research, in which you're building your research based on relationships of trust between a researcher and those who are being researched. And that raises some very significant ethical questions. Of course, each institution, including the University of Alberta, has their own means by which they kind of create a bottom line of things that you have to have considered when you're doing any kind of research that's going to be approved by them and by the ethics board that the university uses. That ethics board is composed of professors and other academics who give of their time to review all of the research that is being done across the institution, and makes decisions about whether that researcher has made the kind of ethical significant ethical considerations that need to be made in order to ensure that there is no harm done to human subjects. So anybody who's doing research involving human subjects, no matter how benign you may believe it to be, still has to go through the research ethics process. It's it's one of those steps that you kind of sit there in fear and trembling that you'll pass, and you may have to make some adjustments. And but they're making those suggestions based on their best judgment, based on the criteria that they use and national bodies that to whom they are responsible. So it's an important part of the whole process. But as a researcher as well, you may be, you may be approved, but that doesn't end the kind of ethical responsibility that you hold. So I've already alluded to the researcher-respondent relationship. That relationship is premised on trust that you build and trust that you hold. You may not have disclosed everything that you're hoping to find. In fact, you won't. Probably. I mean, you're wanting it to be open-ended. You may not know yourself what it is entirely that you're hoping to find in the research that you're doing. And so the respondent trusts that you will take care, that you will do no harm in the research that you do. And so they talk about some of the fieldwork exemplars that came up in their own research. I could bore you ad infinitum the kinds of things that all of us have dealt with in doing qualitative research. They talk, for example, about gatekeepers who are really happy to see a university professor come in and want to do research on their institution and feel that it might be really helpful. And before the researcher even has the words out of their mouth almost, they're saying, sure, that would be great. And so the question then for the researcher is, well, do I go on and do I give them all the kind of possible problems that can occur? Those TV commercials where use this particular drug and oh, and by the way, da-da-da, 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 at the end of the commercial, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I really want to take that drug. Well, as a researcher, you're kind of in the same position. Do you lay it all out? Do you raise all possibilities that you may know and the potential that there may be some that you don't know to somebody who wants to do the research with you? This raises some ethical questions that you need to be thinking about and responding to appropriately. Respondents will do the same thing. Oh, yeah. I know you from, you've visited my school and you seem to be a trustworthy person. Sure, I'd be willing to participate, and may not even read through the whole, paper that you provide for them that outlines the research and all of the possible ramifications that there might be. So, it really is up to you to make sure that everybody understands the potential for harm, and works that through with each of the people that are participating. There's also potential harm to the larger community, where it goes out into the big broad world, and suddenly somebody is looking very closely at the practices of a particular principal or a particular superintendent or a particular teacher or a particular counselor, whatever it may be. Or conversely, and this is in the article, this is what they bring up, where the research is actually used to the detriment of the community. And we have lots of examples of that, for example, in research that's been done in First Nations communities. So, and I use that as a particular example, and of course it's happened in other places as well. So, so these are the potential roadblocks, harms that can happen, and so we have to be sensitive to them and try to work to prevent that from happening as much as possible. There's potential harm to the researcher as well, just the kind of emotional labor of working through these issues, both internally and externally with those that are participating. Or, you make the wrong decision and suddenly your reputation is on the line as an ethical researcher. So, so there are ways in which this can come back to haunt a researcher as well. The important thing in all of this is to take account of the power relationships. Who has the power in this relationship? Who has the power to speak? How is that organized? And how can that be organized to better serve everyone's interests so that harm does not occur? And of course, in all of this, you're balancing the harm potential with the possibility of meaningful research. So let me give you an example. A colleague was doing a large research study looking at banking institutions and the ways in which those with disabilities are integrated into the practices of that institution. Went through the whole process, and at the end of it, in having to show that research to the institution, which was one of the requirements of having being able to even do the research, that institution decided that they did not want it published. So that person's research was gone. Had she or he been able to hide it somehow, would that have been an ethical decision? So that what turned out to be very meaningful research could actually be known. These are the questions that may occur, and so Magolda and Lewis, using their own practices and their own research in the field and so on, have used that to raise some of these questions so that we can think about them. So they then provide some possible avenues that need to be considered, and I would suggest that these would be a good place to start when you're thinking about your forum discussion in response to this module's question, because I think it raises some interesting questions for practices of researchers. So I'm not going to go into that, but I would suggest that you have a good look at it and think about it in the context of the Magolda and Lewis article. And lastly, pardon me, we have the Hostetler article. And in the Hostetler article, he considers the question, what is good research? Now, up until now, and mainly in Creswell, for example, good research is considered to be research that is methodologically supportable, that it is something that we could recommend as having been done correctly or having been done in a way that is that corresponds to best research practice and so on. But Hostetler asks this question from the perspective of an education philosopher who specializes in the notions of ethics and the whole study of ethics. And he then makes a statement near the end of the paper that I think is really an important one, where he talks about how this plays out for us. As education researchers, we have a particular obligation and opportunity to take a leading role in seeing that the research that is done is truly good research. As we do our work, we need to think beyond questions of how we will study students or analyze school policies, and of course we'll do that. But in doing that, we need to think about how we can make life better for people. We need to think beyond our taken for granted ideas of well-being, and he provides lots of examples of how philosophers have done that, have considered questions of well-being, and in doing so raise some kind of uncomfortable questions, especially for practitioners in schools. So, so that raises some interesting ethical questions. And what is good? And make those ideas the objects of serious communal inquiry. Well, in your schools, in your school systems, in our universities, in this course, in the forum that you're going to be participating in. This is a good place to think about and raise these questions in a meaningful and thoughtful and scholarly way. Serving people's well-being is a great challenge, but it is also our greatest calling. And in pursuing that calling, we'll be pursuing Module 2 and then Module 3, 4, 5, and 6. And as we do, your knowledge of all of the various questions that are at the heart of doing good research will be very much at the fore of what we're going to be discussing. So I hope this is helpful to you in just kind of laying the skeleton of what we'll be looking at in Module 2. If you have any questions about the readings, about assignments and so on, please do direct them to me. And I'll be really very interested in reading your forum responses and participating in those discussions to some degree. I don't want to take over any of the forums because, of course, they're where you have an opportunity to really kind of wrestle with the ideas. But if there's something I think of that might move the discussion forward a little bit or raise a question that might be of interest, then I will participate in that way. So I look forward to that. Good luck with Module 2. And as I said, if you have any questions, please do direct them to me.